There's a silent clock in the background of global finance. Every few generations it strikes, and the world's unbeatable money suddenly isn't. Governments lose their superpower, empires lose their reach, and ordinary people wake up wondering why their salary buys less, why their taxes went up, and why the country that used to run the world suddenly doesn't. Historians pretend this is random. Politicians pretend it's manageable. But the last five reserve currencies didn't die by accident. They all follow the same 8-step sequence. 1. A nation becomes so powerful, militarily, economically, technologically, that everyone wants its money. 2. Power turns into overreach. 3. Overreach turns into permanent deficits. 4. Deficits get papered over with easy money. 5. Easy money becomes inflation. 6. Inflation becomes doubt. 7. Doubt becomes alternatives. 8. And alternatives become the new system. Portugal, Spain, the Dutch Republic, the British Empire. Every one of them hit those steps. Every one of them thought they were the exception. And every one of them lost the monetary privilege that made their empire possible. And here's the uncomfortable part. The US dollar, the currency the whole world has needed since 1944, is already sitting at step 6, the loss of confidence phase. The point in the cycle where other nations stop saying, "We trust you," and start saying, "What else is out there?" That shift, more than any election, war, or technology, is what decides who gets to live above their means and who has to start paying cash. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments which empire you think the US is acting like right now. Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, or Britain. Because in a minute you're going to see the pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture Lisbon in the late 1400s. A small kingdom on the edge of Europe suddenly controls the map. Ships are sailing under the Portuguese flag to Africa, India, even Brazil, bringing back gold, spices, and stories that sound like miracles. For the first time in history, a single currency, the Portuguese real, connects 4 continents. This was stage 1. Dominance through discovery and trade. Portugal didn't conquer the world with armies, it conquered it with compasses and caravels. Every trader from London to Istanbul wanted Portuguese coins because they were backed by something real, the wealth flowing into Lisbon's ports. For 80 years, the real was as good as gold, literally. But success carries a curse. It convinces you that limits don't apply. By the early 1500s, Portugal tried to hold a global empire with a population smaller than modern Los Angeles. Dozens of forts, fleets, and faraway colonies demanded constant defense. And defense costs money. Money they didn't have. Stage 2. Overextension. To keep the empire running, Portugal borrowed heavily from Italian and German bankers. Then came stage 3. Deficit spending. The empire's profits couldn't keep up with the expenses of maintaining it. To fill the gap, the government resorted to stage 4, debasement, mixing cheap copper into their gold coins. Merchants noticed. Inflation followed. Prices rose, confidence fell, and within a decade, traders no longer trusted the Portuguese real. By 1530, they demanded Spanish silver instead. Portugal's reign as the world's monetary superpower was over, but the story didn't end there. It simply moved west, to Spain. If Portugal's empire was built on trade, Spain's was built on plunder. In 1519, Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire. 13 years later, Pizarro crushed the Incas. Suddenly, Spain possessed the richest silver deposits the world had ever seen. Mines so vast that historians say they fueled the first global economy. From the Americas to Asia, people traded with the Spanish pieces of eight, the Spanish dollar. It was heavy, shiny, and pure, and because it was backed by real silver, everyone trusted it. Stage 1: Dominance backed by hard money. Spain became the world's banker. For over a century, the Spanish dollar financed global trade, wars, and empires. You could spend it in Beijing, London, or Istanbul. It was universal money. But again, the pattern began. With wealth came arrogance. Spain fought wars on 4 continents against the Ottomans, the French, the English, even their own colonies. They believed the silver would never stop flowing. But silver doesn't make you rich if you spend more than you earn. Stage 2: Overextension. Armies, fleets, palaces, all funded by borrowed money. Stage 3: Deficit spending. And when borrowing wasn't enough, they fell into stage 4: Debasement, diluting their coins with copper to stretch the silver further. Merchants caught on fast. Prices soared. Stage 5: Inflation. Imported goods doubled in cost. By 1600, inflation was eating Spain from the inside out. The more they printed, the less people trusted. By 1620, stage 6: Loss of confidence had arrived. Traders started weighing coins to see how much real silver was left inside. Spain defaulted on its debts 4 times in less than a century. 4 sovereign bankruptcies. Stage 7: Alternatives emerge. The Dutch, who had broken free from Spanish rule, built a new model of finance centered in Amsterdam. Their currency, the Dutch guilder, backed by disciplined banking instead of plunder, began replacing Spanish silver in international trade. And by 1650, stage 8: Collapse was complete. The once mighty Spanish dollar, the reserve currency of the world, was just another coin. Spain remained rich in silver, but poor in trust. And in the end, it's trust that gives money its power. The pattern had revealed itself for the first time. A nation gains dominance through innovation or discovery. It overreaches, it borrows, it prints or debases. Then inflation, loss of confidence, and collapse. Portugal thought they had invented global commerce. Spain thought they had mastered global wealth. Both were wrong, because the moment a currency becomes powerful enough that everyone needs it, is the same moment it becomes vulnerable enough that everyone can destroy it by leaving. But the story didn't stop there. Across the North Sea, a new empire was rising. One built not on gold or conquest, but on credit. And its currency would change how money worked forever. Keep watching, because what happens next changes everything. By the early 1600s, the center of global trade had shifted north. Amsterdam, a city built on reclaimed swamps, had become the financial capital of the world. While Spain was drowning in silver, the Dutch discovered something more powerful than gold: trust. They built the first stock exchange in 1602, the first central bank in 1609, and the first global corporation, the Dutch East India Company. Their ships sailed farther, their books balanced tighter, and their banks didn't gamble with other people's money. The Dutch had turned finance itself into a product. Stage 1. Dominance through innovation. The guilder became the most stable currency on earth. You could trade it in Batavia, Cape Town, or London and know exactly what it was worth. While other nations fought wars, the Dutch printed contracts. Their empire floated not on silver, but on spreadsheets. But even perfect systems rot from within. Stage 2. Overextension. A small nation of just 2 million people tried to rule a web of colonies stretching from the Caribbean to Indonesia. Protecting trade routes meant endless naval wars, especially against a new challenger across the Channel, Britain. The Anglo-Dutch Wars drained their treasury. By the late 1600s, the Republic was spending more on cannons than commerce. Stage 3. Deficit spending crept in quietly. Loans from their own banks, then from foreign investors. Stage 4. Monetary expansion. The Bank of Amsterdam began creating more credit than it could back with metal. Inflation appeared. Stage 5. Confidence erosion. And meanwhile Britain, industrializing fast, expanding faster, had something the Dutch didn't: scale. A bigger navy, bigger population, bigger ambition. By 1720, the world had made up its mind. Stage 7. Alternatives emerge. The pound sterling, backed by Britain's industrial might, was becoming the preferred currency of trade. The Dutch guilder didn't collapse overnight. It simply faded out of relevance. By 1750, the world's merchants no longer needed Dutch money. London had taken Amsterdam's crown. Enter the British Empire, the longest reserve currency reign in history. For over 2 centuries, the pound sterling ruled global finance, trade, and empire. At its peak, Britain controlled a quarter of the Earth's population and land. They built railways across India, telegraph lines across Africa, and ships that circled the world, all priced in pounds. Stage 1. Dominance through Industrial Revolution. Coal, steel, and machines replaced spice and silver as the engines of global power. London's banks became the world's vaults, its navy the world's security system. If you traded anything, cotton, tea, opium, copper, you traded in pounds. But like every empire before it, Britain believed it was exceptional, and like every empire before it, it wasn't. Stage 2. Overextension. Maintaining bases and colonies from Hong Kong to the Caribbean was ruinously expensive. By the late 1800s, rivals, Germany, America, Japan, were catching up. Yet Britain kept spending to maintain global dominance. Stage 3. Deficit spending exploded with World War I. The empire borrowed billions from the United States, mortgaging its colonies and gold reserves. Then came Stage 4, monetary distortion. Britain left the gold standard to fund the war, then disastrously tried to return to it at the old exchange rate, crushing its economy. Stage 5. Inflation hit hard through the 1920s and 30s. Unemployment soared, faith in the pound wavered. By World War II, the empire was financially broken. Britain fought valiantly but borrowed even more, this time from the very nation that would replace it. By 1944, at Bretton Woods, the writing was on the wall. The United States held 2/3 of the world's gold and half its industrial capacity. Stage 6. Loss of confidence became official. The pound once the global anchor was too weak to rebuild the world economy, the dollar was stronger, newer, and backed by America's unbombed factories. Stage 7. Alternatives emerge. The Bretton Woods system crowned the US dollar the new global reserve, and by the 1970s, after devaluations and inflation, Stage 8. Collapse was complete. The British Empire faded into history, and the pound became just another currency. From Portuguese explorers to British bankers, 5 centuries had revealed a chilling pattern. Each reserve currency rose higher than the last and fell faster. Innovation, overreach, debt, inflation, collapse. Each convinced it was different, each proven wrong. But this time, something was different. The next reserve currency wasn't backed by gold or silver or trade. It was backed by paper and by belief. Because in 1944, a new empire took the stage, armed not with ships or colonies, but with printing presses and the power to define value itself. And that empire was America. Keep watching, because the most dangerous part of the cycle hasn't happened yet. When the smoke of World War II cleared, one nation stood untouched, unchallenged, and unbelievably rich. Its factories were running at full capacity. Its gold reserves outnumbered the rest of the world's combined. Its navy commanded every ocean, and its currency, the US dollar, became the world's heartbeat. Stage 1. Dominance through absolute power. At the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, 44 nations gathered to rebuild global finance. The decision was simple: peg every currency to the dollar, and peg the dollar to gold at $35 an ounce. The dollar was as good as gold because it literally was. By 1950, the US made up half of global GDP. American companies produced the cars, planes, steel, and oil the rest of the world needed to rebuild. If you wanted to trade internationally, you needed dollars. But power breeds overreach, and soon, Stage 2, overextension, began. The Cold War stretched America's military across the globe, bases in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam, endless commitments to defend the free world. Then came the welfare state, the space race, and the Great Society. By the late 1960s, the US was spending more than it earned, a familiar story in monetary history. So began Stage 3, deficit spending. The government ran budget deficits year after year. Foreign nations noticed the imbalance. They started demanding real gold instead of paper dollars. In 1971, President Nixon faced an impossible choice: honor the dollar's gold backing and watch US reserves vanish, or break the promise. He chose the latter. The Nixon shock ended the gold standard, and with it, the last restraint on money creation. Stage 4, money printing. Freed from gold, the US could now create dollars at will. The results were immediate. Inflation surged through the 1970s. Oil prices quadrupled. The petrodollar system emerged, linking global oil sales to US currency. America exported inflation and imported everything else. By the 1980s and 90s, globalization supercharged the dollar's dominance. Factories moved overseas, goods got cheaper, and credit got easier. The US traded productivity for purchasing power, and no one complained. Why would they? The rest of the world still needed dollars to trade oil, to settle debts, to save. But underneath the prosperity, stage 5, inflation and debt were quietly building. The cost of living rose, wages stagnated, and the US national debt began its exponential climb from $900 billion in 1980 to over $36 trillion today. The illusion held because the world kept buying US Treasury bonds, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Holding dollars wasn't a choice, it was a requirement of global trade. Then came 2008. A housing bubble detonated, nearly collapsing the global banking system. The Federal Reserve responded with a new phrase that changed history: quantitative easing. Translation: print money electronically. Trillions of it. What was once unthinkable, governments creating wealth out of thin air, became policy. The Fed's balance sheet exploded from $800 billion to $9 trillion. It worked. Temporarily. The economy recovered, but addiction set in. And then came 2020. COVID lockdowns halted global production, but Washington printed $6 trillion anyway. 40% of all dollars in existence were created in 2 years. Inflation followed, predictably, brutally. Prices surged, wages couldn't keep up, and the era of free money met its consequences. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. Foreign nations began quietly backing away. China cut its US bond holdings from $1.2 trillion to $700 billion. Russia dumped dollars entirely. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, announced plans for a joint settlement system to bypass the dollar. Global dollar reserves fell from 73% in 2000 to 55% today. The cracks in confidence are spreading. And as trust fades, stage 7, alternatives emerge. The euro, the yuan, gold, cryptocurrencies, even central bank digital currencies. Each represents a small step away from dollar dominance. None have fully replaced it yet, but history says they don't need to. Once confidence breaks, the fall accelerates. We've seen this movie before, 5 times. Portugal's real, Spain's silver dollar, the Dutch guilder, the British pound. Each collapsed after 80 to 200 years. The US dollar is 81 years into its reign. The math is cruelly familiar. Stage 8. Collapse isn't here yet, but every symptom is. Unsustainable debt, inflation that won't die, enemies building parallel systems, allies hedging their bets. America's greatest privilege, the ability to print the world's money, is slipping away. And when it goes, the consequences won't stay on Wall Street. It will hit pensions, savings, grocery bills. It will redefine the American dream itself. Because when your currency stops being the world's problem, it becomes your problem. But what if this collapse isn't the end, but the transition to something even more controlled? What if the replacement for the dollar isn't foreign at all, but digital, programmable, and already being tested by the same governments losing control today? Because history doesn't stop at stage 8, it just changes the name of the system. Every empire believes it's different. Every generation thinks they've evolved beyond history. And yet, when you strip away the flags and technology, the same rhythm keeps echoing. Power, overreach, denial, decline. For 5 centuries, the pattern has played out with mathematical precision. And right now, The numbers say the United States is standing at the edge of stage 7. But collapse doesn't always come with explosions. Sometimes it comes quietly, through smaller paychecks, shrinking savings, and the slow realization that what used to be easy now costs everything. This is how a reserve currency dies. Not in a single moment, but in millions of daily transactions that suddenly feel heavier. Groceries cost more. Rent never drops. Retirement looks farther away. And the rest of the world simply moves on. Yet within every collapse is a reset, a chance to remember what money was supposed to be. Not a tool for empire, but a measure of value. Not a weapon of control, but a promise of trust. If history teaches anything, it's that privilege always expires, but innovation always returns. Portugal gave us exploration. Spain gave us trade. The Dutch gave us banking. Britain gave us industry. America gave us the digital economy. The question isn't whether the dollar will lose its throne. It's what replaces it and who controls it. Will it be a new global currency built by emerging powers? A central bank digital currency that replaces freedom with surveillance? Or something truly decentralized? A system that belongs to no one because it belongs to everyone. The answers will define not just markets, but the future of power itself. Because when money changes, everything changes. Politics, war, freedom, even identity. Maybe the dollar's decline isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the part where we finally learn to see money not as faith in a flag, but as faith in ourselves. If this story opened your eyes, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, share, and tell me, what lesson will you never forget? Because history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming louder than ever.